All right. This is
Uh,
episode 59 of the Bridge podcast. I'm joined today by Killick Hinds. Killick is a guitarist, if you want to call him that. A little bit more than that, guitarist, etc. Thanks so much for joining me, Killick. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So I like to do a sort of intro question of just asking people if they enjoy coffee, if they have any coffee habits that they can share. And I'm curious, do you drink coffee?
I do not drink coffee. I've had one cup of coffee in my entire life.
What?
Um, yeah. Um, I was 18 years old. I was in Mexico, and everybody was having coffee, so I thought I'll have coffee. And one cup of black coffee kept me up for about 5 nights.
Ooh.
Yeah, or 4 nights. I don't want to exaggerate, but I couldn't sleep the entire time. It was actually horrible.
Wow. I'm sorry that that was your experience.
It tasted good, I'll say that much. But it kind of, I don't know, it sort of peppered the entire experience from then on.
Man, that's crazy. I most everybody responds saying that they do drink coffee,
Okay.
and I got a like I sort of assumed that there was a slight chance that you didn't drink coffee, but
Do I
that's
look like somebody who doesn't drink coffee?
I mean, as I've gotten to know your music a little bit more, I've like, my introduction to your music was through your Halloween thing with Henry Kaiser.
Oh,
A-
okay. Yeah.
And then I read about your Rain and Blood cover. And then as I got to know your music more, I was like, this dude is a very peaceful dude. So it makes sense now. Cool. Well, interesting. Um, cool. That
I do enjoy a little bit of caffeine, I have to say. I can't have much. I'm pretty sensitive to it, but I like kombucha, so I have one going off to the side here. Um, and that's got a little bit of caffeine, and sometimes like in the morning or something. I haven't done this actually in years, but I'll have a little bit of green tea, and that's kind of nice. But coffee I'll leave to just the olfactory
Gotcha.
experience.
Interesting. I mean, for me, it's a very central part of like motivating creative stuff. But I feel like that I'm curious to hear about what fuels you creatively then instead.
Um,
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty, obviously, but
Fermented vegetables, maybe.
okay, nice. What's your favorite fermented vegetable?
Oh, wow. I do love beetroot, or when beets
Nice.
are fermented. It's just the colors are so potent, um I'm hoping it translates to the health benefits. But pretty much anything fermented.
Nice.
Yeah, I like sour, stinky, bitter, all that kind of stuff.
Nice. Do you do mostly your own fermentation, or do you just sort of like farmers markets or regular markets?
Yeah, farmers and regular markets for the most part. We've tried a little bit here and there, and I'm not the most successful um, fermenter. If success is judged by the potability of the end result, yeah, I don't have a green thumb or the proverbial um, food touch. I don't.
Interesting. Well, I'm also a big fan of fermentation and fermented stuff. That's cool. Okay. I like to know where your microbes are, well,
Better than
um,
ever.
so like I mentioned, Henry Kaiser in that video was the first thing
Mhm.
that I saw of you, and I was like, I need to talk to this guy.
Oh
I was
wow.
immediately intrigued. And you see your guitar, and it's like more strings than there are frets. You're oftentimes doing no frets whatsoever. How did you get into sort of non-guitar guitars? Like, I
Oh,
said you're a guitarist, but
hmm.
you're
Yeah,
beyond a
with an
guitarist.
asterisk. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, so I'm trying to think exactly. I mean, I started playing electric guitar first. Most people with guitar start with an acoustic guitar, but I had an electric guitar and I mostly played it unamplified, so it was essentially acoustic, just really quiet. And
Mhm.
I think that was really formative for me. I think I really got into the sort of tactile sensation of the instrument. The sort of interface with your mind, body, soul. Um, imparting and infusing and absorbing and getting energy from this inert object, that actually does have a sparkle of some sort of spark of life in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so already, so from the very beginning, there was sort of an unusual relationship to sound making. Most people were really into most of my peers, it was always amps on, and playing at high volume. And I actually, although I did it, to play in bands and stuff, I really liked just that kind of quiet sensation, which I now recognize as something like the chamber music phenomenon, or or the salon, just the small gathering, or even just people sitting around a campfire or something.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so starting to look at the parameters and the boundaries of guitar, I started thinking, what are the different attributes that could be there that aren't typically there on a 6-string guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I started with the idea that I wanted to expand the pitch range. So I didn't do much in terms of detuning or scordatura, but I ended up getting a 7-string acoustic guitar in 1995, which at the time was extremely unusual, nearly unheard of.
The steel string?
I mean, I know it was steel string, yeah.
Cool.
And I mean, I know George Van Epps, and I know there were innovators, and Russian 7-strings go back to the 1800s or more. But in the modern acoustic guitar lineup, there weren't really many 7-strings at that time. So that was a breakthrough, actually, I would say. Just having it wasn't so much about the 7 strings or the chord shapes that it would open up. It was more about range for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I tended to use it sort of as in an accompaniment role, rather than just playing everything really low. I was using it more like a 6-string with the ability to, doom, 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 to be able to go like that underneath.
Totally.
6-string type stuff. But again, I'm speaking in generalities because I don't have a set repertoire, on any instrument. So yeah, so the pitch thing was first, and then the next horizon was at the same time fretlessness,
mm-hmm.
and on guitar per se, and then MIDI as well, and MIDI, this would have been around 1997, and MIDI, the MIDI protocol was probably exactly as it is today, but the sounds were lacking. Generally they weren't the most inspiring sounds. They're what we'd call now general MIDI, and they have a charm, they have a charm for sure. And there's a place, but it's not the richest and most enveloping sonic experience. It wasn't back then. So that at the time was more of a novelty for me, or sort of like, I'm dipping my toes into it, but I don't know if I I don't know if I'm getting a lot out of it.
Right.
And I don't know if I'm contributing much with it either. So, but the fretlessness stuck, that I really liked. And it was a 7-string. It was an electric 7-string fretless. And that was really, really, really helpful. It ended up being sort of a stepping stone. I ended up selling it, and then moving to the harpeggione, which is my main instrument. The harpeggione is it's a 6-string instrument that has 12 additional sympathetic strings, and it's based on the Hardanger fiddle of Norway. And so the Hardanger fiddle is essentially a violin that's made for chording, and also has sympathetic strings that go through a channel in the neck, and then they emerge over the top of the body to their own separate sympathetic resonating bridge. So it's a combination of the Hardanger fiddle and the arpeggione from Italy, which is a bowed guitar. tuned in standard, E, A, D, G, B, E, and but bowed, and played between the knees generally. It didn't usually have a spike. So the harpeggione has a spike. It's got frets. They're quarter toned up to a fifth above the open string, so like up to the seventh fret, and then there's equal temperament standard fretting up higher, and the tuning is sort of a modified cello tuning. The middle four strings are cello strings. I keep the lower two of those down a step and a half, and then the upper two of the cello strings down a step, and then I have a higher string, which is just below the guitar's high E, and then the low string is really low. It's in the contrabass range, actually below a bass range. So, and that just developed over time as well. Just a series of happy accidents.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you work with a number of like luthiers and instrument makers. Who is the sort of hand behind the harpeggione?
It's Fred Carlson.
Okay, Fred Carlson.
Who is in Santa Cruz, California.
Very cool.
And Fred's been a really, really major force in my artistic development. He's a good friend, and just encountering his work around the year 1996 in a magazine called American Luthery just opened a portal. It just changed everything for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I guess first of all, the range thing is an interesting way to sort of dive into that. I just, as of like a year and a half ago, became a 7-string guitarist, and like I'm like, why did I not jump on this earlier?
Well, welcome to the club.
Yeah, feels good to be one of us. There's so many interesting like the Pat Metheny sort of weird harp guitar, like Michael Hedges, I know that you're really into. Can you sort of just, for people that aren't aware of like atypical guitars like this, who are like some really cool people to check out besides yourself?
In the atypical guitar world, and thank you. Hans Reichel comes to mind. Hans was a German instrument maker. He made very unusual instruments that oftentimes had a third bridge, which means the length of the string is divided somewhere. So you get, if you amplify the back side or the opposite side of the bridge, you get these celestial overtones and all sorts of things. And he was also a font maker as well. That was apparently how he made a living, was making fonts. And and he made a really interesting instrument called the daxophone as well, which is a very fascinating vocal. It's almost like an acoustic theremin or something like that, using a wedge of wood on a tongue made of wood. You kind of rock the wedge called the dax, and then you take a violin bow or a cello bow and you bow the tongue, and you get these wild jumps in pitch and all kinds of unusual timbres and colors. It really sounds like the human voice for the most part. If the human voice was a robot, from 10 million years ago or something. Let's see, Sandy Ewan. She's a guitarist from Texas, and she lives in New York. And she takes an approach with the guitar. She plays it on her lap, conventional 6-string guitar. But over the course of a show, she almost never reveals any of the sound characteristics of guitar. And she doesn't use effects pedals. She uses a little bit of stereo panning, but it's almost all done with implements and just her fingers. She's extracting, I guess some of the sounds might be considered industrial, like the sounds of electricity or sounds of nature, buzzes and clicks and all kinds of things. But it's really quite it's quite profound, and there's a real dynamic motion to it. It's definitely, there's propulsion, even though there's never anything that could easily be categorized as a time signature or a tempo even. There's no musical attributes we're familiar with, but it just keeps moving and unfolding. It's really great.
Awesome.
I'm trying to think of some other unusual guitarists. I mean, is it okay to just say there's so many? I love them all,
Of course, yeah.
yeah, because I'm drawing a blank right now.
Yeah, I mean, those are two people that I'm unfamiliar with that I'm looking forward to diving into.
Oh, great, great.
Um, I was super intrigued to see that you did a cover album of Rain and Blood by Slayer.
Yeah.
And I love that album, but I kind of had no idea what to expect. And so when I heard it, like for a second, I was like, huh, how is this? And then I was like, oh, I hear everything. Like, and when I was reading you talk about it, you described something as basically like playing in the tenor of something without necessarily having a clear link to like the reference material.
Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting to like distinguish between the tenor and the reference material. And so I'm curious sort of like if you can just talk about that cover album and like how you translated that, because it's so much the same material, but it's so different in
Wow.
quality. I just love to hear about that.
Thanks. Yeah, that was done in 2004, or the studio recording was done in 2004. And yeah, when I was a kid, so I was 13, I think, when Rain and Blood came out. And it was a really, really important album for me and my cohort. And I mean, like really important. I mean, I would say I've probably heard that album more than any other album ever.
Interesting.
I've
Okay.
probably heard, I know I've heard it more than 1,000 times in its entirety, and so I kind of knew every little nuance of the album,
Mhm.
beyond just the songwriting or the lyrics. Like I know where, okay, I think there's a splice there, and there's little things that I always picked up on. And to me, that sort of stuff is just as interesting as the songwriting or the performance. The circumstances under which something is made are interesting to me.
Mhm.
I look at an album, Rain and Blood by Slayer, or almost any album, as it's a snapshot. It's a picture of a certain time and a certain place and a certain mindset. And obviously Slayer, they must have drunk coffee, I'm sure, before recording that album, because at the time it was probably the most intense thing
Right.
anybody had ever done in the metal world. And yeah, so I guess one day I was sitting around, it was probably around 2003, and I started thinking, wow, like there's certain albums that, although I may not listen to often any longer, they were so formative. So I started thinking, wow, how much of my sensibility was influenced by that album? And the answer is a lot. The answer is a real lot. And so I I wanted to, so I don't know how I got the idea exactly to cover it, but I thought if I was going to do it, the songs are so short that I had to do the whole thing, because the whole album is a little less than 30 minutes.
Mhm.
And the original, I should say, is less than 30 minutes. And mine is about the same. I keep pretty closely to the time parameters on it. But I guess my approach was just, I listened to, once I decided I was going to cover it, I just listened to it again and again, over and over, like with new ears or new perspective from some, distance. And I just started to hear that, the foundation of the album, everything is so solid. That's what makes it enduring and a classic. It was kind of an instant classic. But the structures are really strong, and the way that things flow from one to the next is, kind of seamless.
Mhm.
It's really, really it's a well-crafted work of art. And it's not just, crazy, just crazy teenagers or early 20s people playing as fast as they can. It's also that, I suppose, but whether by accident or design, they really stumbled into something, quite beautiful. And so I don't like to repeat things in my artistic life, and even in my own life. I don't even like to overuse certain words. I try to always find a different word when
Hmm.
I'm talking about something. I fall short, but I try. I don't like cliche. I
Right.
don't like I don't like repetition unless it's in minimalism, you know?
Mhm.
And so I thought, okay, the other challenge is to translate a group effort to a solo instrument without, you
Mhm.
know, there's no effects. The only effect on the album is some reverb here and there, just to give a sense of space in the slower part, you know, the more spacious parts, of which there are very few. um, and So I started thinking, you know, what's the most important thing to convey the information of an album? And generally, I think with most albums, you would say it's the vocals. If there's vocals, you know, that's the most important thing that people are really latched onto. But with Rain and Blood, the focus shifts pretty often. Sometimes it's the vocals. You know, when Tamaraya is screaming, you
Mhm.
know, that's what you're really focused on. But take that away, and then the drums are prevalent here, the guitars are prevalent here. Um, you know, rarely the bass on that album, but there's always it's always shifting. So I suppose intuitively, I just kind of like I went with the energy of what conveys the song, what carries the song, because I wasn't trying to do the thing of it's more popular now than it was back then, but doing like all of the parts of a song at once on guitar,
Mhm.
where you're doing the drums, doing this and then, and then the guitar and then with your nose, you're making
Yeah.
it, you know, do the melodies and stuff. So I thought I wanted it to kind of be that narrow focus, so it's almost like, the eye of Sauron is shifting and changing and then sometimes gets really tight and opens and so that's what I tried to do. I mean, um, I'm probably assigning meaning to the creation of it that may not have been there when I did it. Um, but that's what it seems to me now. That's what seems like was going on. And yeah, and I feel like it was pretty successful in the sense of conveying the vibe of the album without being just a cover, which would in my estimation would be kind of pointless, to
Mhm.
just do a direct cover of it because it's
Right.
already been done and it's been done better than I or anybody could do. Nobody's going to make a better Rain and Blood than Slayer.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Um, Interesting. That makes me think of the guy who plays like, Dvorak's New World Symphony on classical guitar, and it's like
yeah.
that's super impressive, but that's absolutely not what you're doing. Excuse me. Thinking about Slayer, like, I understand being a 13-year-old and like really connecting with that album. And there's something that's like, you're young and you like evil things maybe, or
Yeah, of
like you
course.
like horror movies or whatever, but there's something about Slayer where it's like, it's so so death focused and so evil, and but at the same time, like, you're obviously a very like peaceful, life affirming person, which sort of doesn't blend with that, which is interesting. But then like, I guess like this is an ill-formed question, but I'm curious, like, part of the Slayer sound to me that's so central is like that parallel fourths quality, and there's something about that
Hmm.
that sounds so sort of uh maybe not like, there's something that's severe sounding about it, and I'm curious, like, what do you think of that particular parallel fourth quality of them, as somebody who's listened to that album so much?
Well, I think um, that's certainly present, and it does have a sort of impact, um, especially through like big amplification and stuff like that. And I've seen Slayer live. I I saw them on the Rain and Blood tour, and the visceral impact is, yeah, it's extraordinary. It's it's a full body experience for sure. But but I think if you dive behind it a little bit, Jeff Hanneman's writing in particular, he wasn't afraid to put in unconventional for heavy metal sort of harmonies that actually they don't neatly adhere to um, any well-established notion of classical harmony, but he was an intuitive, of course. He sort of, he just went with what sounded cool, I think. But he wasn't afraid to do things, like having major thirds descend and stuff like that. He wasn't afraid of major thirds. He wasn't afraid of happy or pretty harmonies, or right. But when those happy and pretty harmonies are kind of shifted, in blocks, over time, they can stack up to be something ambiguous, and then but definitely leaning towards evil. And that's what's so great about it, is that you can actually, I can hear it in sort of different ways. I hear that I can hear that it's evil and all that sort of thing, but I also hear that it's fun. It's a celebration of just like, let's make the most awesome thing we can.
Cool. Interesting. Well, yeah, I really enjoyed your version of all those songs, and even the cover art, like, somehow strangely hints at the cover art that they had. I don't know if there was a connection there.
Thank you. The cover art, so the version that's on Bandcamp has like lots of skulls, and it says, and there's writing that says war, war, war all over it. The art was done by an artist in Athens named Ryan Miller, and he had this concept called war art. And the war art always had that juxtaposition of the horrors, of war and hatred, but then also like some hope, some flower growing, or something like that, very stark contrasts, and there was a restaurant in Athens called The Grit, and Ryan worked there, and he had that piece on the wall at The Grit. And so I just got to talking with him, and I was like, that would be the absolute perfect thing for this Rain and Blood, and so he agreed to it. And the original cover was actually just black. I didn't have the art, that artwork with the skulls by Ryan was inside the the booklet, the folding booklet. But for the internet, if you just had it be black, it just looked like there was nothing there. So
right.
And it's funny because Spinal Tap, of course, famously, has the all black album, and then Metallica has the black album, but both of them had some embossing or something else. They weren't really actually just a black square. So I thought, that's what I'll do. So the original was just a black square, which I think was I think was more black than Spinal Tap or Metallica.
Nice.
But anyway, yeah. So Ryan's art now is the cover of my cover.
Very cool. With like the sort of evil aesthetic that goes into that, like I mean, I don't want to like make assumptions, but you seem like a fairly pacifistic guy, and I'm wondering how you connect with that, because like like I feel very much the same way, and I love like brutal technical death metal and all this sort of stuff. But then you become aware of some of the history of it, and like not as much with death metal, but like with black metal, where there's like genuine hatred and violence, and it's like
no.
It's weird to have any connection with that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a big issue with distinguishing between the artist and the art sometimes. Right. Unfortunately, if we applied modern standards to a lot of the things that we love from hundreds of years ago, it wouldn't be acceptable. The origins, or at least the thought process of the person would be really frowned upon, I think, by most people. And certainly with the modern phenomenon, well, it's not modern anymore, but the rise of black metal, in Norway, while some of it is just it's an exploration of the dark side of humanity and all that, some of it was actually like more like a a manifesto, an actionable manifesto, and and it caused a lot of harm. I mean, a lot of those beautiful churches were burned and people were murdered and all kinds of stuff. So I I uh my preference is that storytelling be reserved for storytelling and
Hmm.
not a call to action.
Right.
Not anything that is should be emulated, or these are. I look at something like the Slayer album. Most of the lyrics on Rain and Blood, as a cautionary tale, or it's an exploration. I don't think there are any. I don't think there are any topics that should be forbidden from discussion or parsing.
Hmm.
But um, but leave the hatred, to fantasy. Leave don't act on these things. The human mind can spin all kinds of stories, and can spin or reveal prejudices and hatreds or whatever. But in my estimation, it's definitely best to
Yeah.
let those things just dissipate into the wind. Let them go.
Hmm.
Don't advance them. Don't make them part of your legacy. Don't you know it's when you sort of unburden yourself from acting on bad things, it makes you walk lighter. You don't carry as heavy a burden. You don't carry as heavy a baggage, and hopefully that helps you not take it out on other people.
Hmm.
Take out your fears, your hatreds, your prejudices, whatever. So I forgot your question.
I don't know if it was a question. I think it was just me talking. In our email exchange, you mentioned some events in your life that were life affirming, or like, near death experiences, and sort of like the calamity that influenced your music. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about just like, I mean, that is interesting how much sort of like rough stuff has gone into various albums of yours, but what sort of like lessons did you learn from that, or how did it impact you as a musician, improviser?
Well, I guess I just have to differentiate between the different calamities. Each probably had lessons, and the major one, I suppose, the biggest one was in 2008. I had a bleeding duodenal ulcer, and it came on without warning, I guess. And didn't have any pain associated with it. There was no real discomfort, but I just woke up one day and I was feeling, the word I was using was lazy. I was just feeling like
Hmm.
I couldn't get anything done. I couldn't get things happening, And anyway, long story short, I lost over half my blood
Wow.
internally. And by the time I was in the hospital, yeah, it was really touch and go. And there was a point at which, I mean, there were several points my heart stopped, a few times, and um, they did the just like the movies, they did the stuff, and I was in and out of um, the material reality we're surrounded with, on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I kind of like, at a certain point, I sort of just drifted away, if that makes any sense. And my consciousness, my perception, however you want to look at it, um, just sort of opened up to the universe, is the best way I can look at it.
Hmm.
Like as if you were just, there was no longer, you were just in outer space, and there was no longer, um, there was very little in the way of sensation or feeling or thought. And then I think I did have a thought, and it was basically about my wife, and just that I didn't want her to be alone. And I sort of came back, you know, like just popped back into my body. And yeah, that happened, and then I would say a few days later, I kind of had a sort of uh, like stripped to the marrow kind of experience of just like I felt this huge sense of just being sorry for anything bad I'd ever done in my life. Anytime I've ever hurt anybody, or said something I shouldn't have said, or just all of my regrets, or uh, yeah, my sadnesses, my angers, everything just kind of came to a head. And I just released. I cried a lot, and I just felt this big feeling of how sorry I was for anything I'd ever done to contribute to the problems in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just that I was filled with love, like love for people and places and things, and and just everything and everyone. And um yeah, it was just a total experience, a total sensation. And um it's not as immediate. This is now, what, 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago. It's not as immediate, those feelings are not at the forefront of my awareness right now. But they're definitely on the they're not on the back burner, but they're running in the background,
Mm-hmm.
as they would say on a computer. These are background tasks, that I feel I feel the sort of that foundational principle of just trying to be a better person, just kind of informs what I do. I don't always live up to it, but I try to have that be the case. And I think this comes back to music, and how music, I feel, is making music is one of the best things a human can engage in, because when they're making music, they're not killing anybody. They're
Yeah.
not, they're not, they're not causing any real harm, unless the music is particularly obnoxious at the wrong time.
Yeah.
But so I feel like music making, and that's part of why I've dived into music so much, not because it's an easy pass against my natural tendency of killing and mayhem, but because I'd rather look at it from the other way, that it's something really positive to indulge in, to fully embrace,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, that between music making, hiking, and then my rekindled love of bicycling, um, those are my three favorite things, music, hiking, and biking. And then, followed by, um, I guess, like literature, although I'm a really slow reader, and then movies, like, especially like really good sci-fi.
Okay. Some of this, I feel like also is starting to hint at your interest in meditation, and like, a different sort of angle on this. Instead of like near-death experiences, your 11-day Vipassana retreat. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious how things like Vipassana or just meditation interact with your music playing. I mean, like, when do they blend together into a single thing? I
Mm.
mean, like, yeah, I guess I'm just curious about your relationship between music and meditation.
Well, meditation to me, I mean, so there's formal meditation, in the sense of plopping yourself on a cushion, or sitting upright, closing your eyes,
Hmm.
um, and focusing on, either a mantra or the breath, or um, whatever technique. And I've done a lot of that. But I feel like music making in itself is a sort of meditation, in the sense that the analytical brain the analytical part of the brain. I'm speaking about, improvisational music generally when I say
Okay.
this. But the analytical part, kind of like takes a nap when you're engaged in that task. In sports they call it the zone, and it's like sort of effortless activity. Your years of training and enculturation and practice and everything factor in, but then you can kind of let go of it and just let these sort of autonomic processes uh, take precedence, And so in that regard, while it's not strictly speaking meditation when I'm performing, it's got a lot of the attributes, I think. And in performance, in front of an audience, especially with improvisational music, for me, this wasn't always the case, but I've been doing it for a long time. So I'm focused on the task, but not really thinking about it, just kind of doing it whatever it needs. And then I'm also aware of the audience and aware of the energy in the room and the surroundings and circumstances, but I'm not focused on that either. I'm sort of it's very, it's a flow state, and if something really, really strikes my attention, of course, that can pull me out of the moment, but that's very rare. And and that's my preference. And I think as a performer, anyway, a live performer, I've moved away from memorized music to almost exclusively improvised. As a composer, or as someone working, just at home, I will do preordained music, where I have to think about how to transition from this to this, or how these chords work against these. But as an improviser, I don't like to do that. I don't like to have that sort of back office stuff happen in a concert setting.
Right.
It's just not my preference, and I admire people who not only thrive at recreating their memorized music, but actually really, really enjoy it. I think that's wonderful. And you can feel that. You can sense when a performer loves sharing that stuff that they've played, a million times before. But every time they find some new, fresh way to approach it. And I think that's wonderful. I don't have that tendency. I just don't. And I've tried. I've over the years, I tried to really fully enjoy that sort of thing. I've in different styles, whether it was rock or jazz or folk or heavy metal even. And I never fully enjoyed it the way I do improvised music. So I realized, okay, that's my thing. I should stick with it, and just honor that. But as the Vipassanā aspect, Vipassanā sort of confirmed a lot of the things that I experienced or encountered or learned from. They validated, I should say, not confirmed. They sort of they made me realize, okay, I did have a profound encounter, with the unknown, in the year 2008. It kind of showed me that is the ultimate destination. The ultimate destination for all of us is unknown. It's a blank slate, and we can we can put our beliefs or our hopes into it, but ultimately no one really knows what happens, to the human soul or whatever when when we go bye-bye. So Vipassanā gave me more of that sense of that the big mystery, and then also I think with Vipassanā there was a deepening of my ability to access the really bad things within us, or within me anyway. the things that I don't like, the hatreds and the prejudices and things like that. And I don't know if this is a metaphor or what, but what I encountered was like almost like a plume of volcanic fire, just shooting up, out of a pustule, like just a massive, seismic event,
Mhm.
and the, that plume of molten lava shooting 1,000 feet in the air was kind of all the hatred of humanity, all the wars and all the negativity and all the bad stuff, that all the heavy stuff and even the petty stuff, even the small little things. All of it was just, just I was sort of experiencing and observing at the same time this, just all this hatred, and it just kept pouring and pouring, and day after day, this was my experience within the meditations, and then finally, after several days of that, um, this is many hours a day of meditation, 14 hours a day of meditation, actually.
Wow.
And after several days of just that plume of hatred, shooting into the air, it started sputtering a little bit more. It wasn't a solid. It wasn't like, just this dense mass, it was more like kind of like coughing, and it wasn't really generating as much. And then finally, by the end of the Vipassanā retreat, the that that hole in the ground was more smoldering. It was smoking, and there's charred remains, but it wasn't so much like spitting in the air. And yeah, I think basically, I don't know that I tapped into anything epigenetic or cosmic, but my encounter was just that I let all this hatred, that was inside me, just kind of like burn out, just let it do its thing, and didn't take it out on anybody. It was really intense. It was very difficult, to
Mhm.
to endure. Is that the right word? Because that makes it feel like I was just stealing myself, and I was, and on a certain level, just like, just let it be over, please, like, but I just stuck with it, and I don't know, it just it unburdened me, addition, like further unburdening.
And
um
did you say that this whole plume thing sort of petered out at the end of the Vipassana, or like in the middle, or when did you
towards
start?
the end towards
Towards
the
the end,
end.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, good timing, because then you have to get in your car and drive home. It was a long drive, because the retreat center is like more than 6 hours from here.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
so that's what I was thinking. I was like, oh, do I really need to be on the road for 6 hours dealing with a plume of molten hot hatred?
Dang.
So thankfully thankfully things calmed down quite a bit before I had to say, okay, bye everybody, okay. you know
Yeah. I'm glad the timing was right. And that's
yeah, timing
all
was good.
that's all
Yeah.
very beautiful, and thanks for, sharing such personal details about all that. It's very interesting. I'm curious, I could talk about consciousness type stuff with you all day, but I do feel
Yeah.
like I want to get back to some guitar stuff. I remember reading you were saying that like you were, I don't know if it was the harpeggione that you were practicing, but essentially while your wife was like asleep, and like you knew that if like there was any sort of stirring, then you needed to like calm it down or like pull it back. And that makes me think of Wes Montgomery and the thumb. Sorry, am I getting that right?
You're correct about my part. Yeah, yeah. I don't know
Okay.
the West Montgomery thing though.
I'm pretty sure that he essentially was only practicing with his thumb because his wife was asleep, and he had to like practice while she was asleep, and so like that became the defining sort of thumb technique for him. And I thought
Yeah,
that's a very interesting sort of way to cultivate your own sound, is like practicing while your wife is asleep.
that's exactly it. No, I relate completely. So we had this rule for a while. that I wasn't allowed to use the bow. Like I play with a bass bow
Mm-hmm.
primarily, but or a cello bow, but I wasn't allowed to use the bow after I think can't remember if it was 10 or 11 p.m. There was, because our place is quite open and small, and so anything somebody does affects the other, and anyway, yeah, I definitely, what I learned was to really cultivate that, like I told you, my early interest in just the acoustic sounds, to really cultivate like what's happening in all aspects of the instrument's resonations, like not just the overt fundamentals, but fundamental pitches, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but like all of the handling characteristics, the handling noises that most guitarists either obscure with distortion or overdrive, or in a like classical setting or even a folk setting, they try to minimize. They put these weird oils on their fingers, and
Hmm.
to keep from having,
Oh,
not
like the
not
little.
many people do this, but
Mm-hmm.
there are people who really want to eliminate all of the squeaks and the creaks and the fret outs and all these other you
Mm-hmm.
know inevitable parts of guitar playing. Guitars, they're creaky, that's what they do. And so that was actually really helpful. I think that sort of nocturnal limitation um, really helped me develop um, more of a dynamic range in my playing. So things weren't just at a constant attack or a constant volume. I there's definitely the arpeggione in particular doesn't readily have a wide dynamic range. It's for the fundamental note production, it tends to be on or off. You can pluck it and it does its thing or not. But within that sort of that sort of narrow confine, I tried to expand it, to really be able to get into the tiny details, and then go full tilt, at times. Um, so yeah, so playing quietly actually really has influenced me. And even when I play amplified, I tend not to dig in too much. I play pretty lightly, even if
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing fast or frenetically, or if the style, is intense, like the video with Henry Kaiser, that's in the style of death metal anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm playing very lightly, in the video. So that video, we were what's the word? Not lip syncing, but guitar syncing.
Mm-hmm.
The music was pre-recorded, and then at least my part. I don't know how
Oh,
Henry did.
okay, interesting.
I had to just to play, and my 8-string guitar that I play in that video doesn't have a strap, or doesn't have buttons for a strap. So I had to, in order to look like I was standing, I have one knee on the stool I'm sitting on right now, and you can kind of see it in the video. I don't know what it looks like, but so anyway, I'm standing there and trying to balance the guitar, because that's not how I normally play that guitar. It's a seated guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and in real life I used a pick, but on the video I just used my finger, my thumb, um, which I usually do, but I didn't like the sound I was getting for that style, so
Mm-hmm.
I ended up using a pick. But my preference is just to play with my thumb. So it's kind of like Wes Montgomery. If he had to do a death metal song, he'd probably use a pick.
Yeah, and if his wife did the hair and the vocals in the video.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Exactly.
I guess real quick, what's the story with the hair and vocals thing?
Well, yeah, it's a consequence of the pandemic. My wife grew her hair is usually long, but she grew it really long during the pandemic. Or what that means is we didn't leave the house for 2 years,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
so So her hair got longer and longer and longer and longer. And so she finally has like proper old school death metal hair. It's
Nice.
like like obituary length,
Hmm.
and so anyway, we thought, oh, if this is a death, Henry was the one who suggested doing something in the style of death metal, and so I was like, oh, Jolene's got to be in it, that's my wife's name, so
Hmm.
she's got to be, she's got to be in it, so she agreed, and then she did these vocals. So she's not lip syncing, she's hair syncing, when it was pre-recorded as well, and then she just had to do her acting bit.
Yeah, I guess the vocals weren't quite Tom Araya, but like they're great, and I was tickled by them. With the whole fretless thing, and like I remember seeing when I first investigated you, like stuff about like intuitive intonation, and
Mm.
I guess like I've always taken some issue with the way that the guitar is tuned, just like and I've let go of this over the years, but like there are all these issues about like, oh, uh you know just intonation versus equal temperament, and I know that you're into quarter tone stuff. How do you think about intonation, like I guess like when you have that whole door opened up with a fretless guitar?
Well, what's funny with fretless, I think it was this sort of need to prove myself, or to um I was really worried about what others might think of my intonation when I first started playing fretless guitar. So my number one goal at that time was to be able to play in tune,
Hmm.
and this meaning pretty much as we've heard on guitar, and guitars are all like, I know what you're saying. Guitars are completely out of tune when they're in tune.
Hmm.
But um we're used to a certain sound. You make a D chord and it sounds a certain way, and and the F sharp, is just like, oh, why can't it just be a little better, and so on fretless guitar, I tried to not only be as good as having frets, but even better, because then I could push my middle
Hmm.
finger back to get that F sharp like a little flatter than a fret would do, and
Hmm.
then that was kind of a sweet spot. Um, so so I think that taught me. I think that initial focus on um, being in tune, so I wasn't laughed at. um, it taught me that intonation is subjective, and there's many different systems. There's many different um, cultural norms, um, and I think my tendency is to go with the sort of Western chromatic scale, and but again, I want the flexibility
Hmm.
to make the interactions between different notes within that Western chromatic thing to make them more pleasing. So the intuitive intonation concept that I have is not, it's not systematized, it's not rigid. It's basically just being able to play in a way that's pleasing to me in the moment.
Hmm.
Um, and typically on playback, if I listen back to something that I've done, I feel pretty good. I like my sense of intonation
Hmm.
because um, I'm not locked into any particular strategy with it.
Hmm.
I hear people who are really locked into a strategy, and I don't like their sense of intonation. I absolutely adore Kirk Hammett's lead playing, but when he bends his strings, he just doesn't. To me, it doesn't. It's not going for what I think he's trying to go for, but he's consistent. So that's obviously his bag. That's his shtick.
Hmm.
uh, but I don't care for the result. On the other hand, I love that kind of stuff. But but as soon as he starts bending, I'm like, oh, don't, no, 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 or keep going, or don't start.
Hmm.
um,
um to I guess like I'm curious if you are familiar with these people and if you have any comments. I think the next guest on the podcast is probably going to be Timucin Sahin. Are you familiar with this playing? I
I'm
don't know if
sorry.
that's how you say his name. Timucin Sahin
Oh,
plays
I
a.
don't know the name.
I feel like he's a dude that you should check out. He plays
Yeah.
a double neck guitar. One's fretless 7 string, one's just normal 6 string. I
Wow.
think he's probably going to be the next guitarist. So
Oh,
like,
fantastic.
or the next guest rather. Very cool playing. The other person I'm curious about is Ellen Fullman. Are you familiar with her?
Oh, yeah, the long
Yeah,
strings. Yeah, yeah, I love her work. Yeah,
very cool.
absolutely.
Those are both people who have interesting sort of intonation perspectives. So I was just curious if you
Yeah,
knew
yeah.
either.
I do love when people have a very highly developed personal approach, to intonation. Harry Parch being
Hmm.
probably the big one. Ellen Fullman is a great example, and trying to think of other people. Oh, even people like uh, Bakithi Kumalo,
Hmm.
the bassist from Paul Simon's
Interesting.
Graceland album.
Okay.
Maybe you know the song "You Can Call Me Al." It has this. It's unusual because it has a like a bass break in it. There's this little sort of spontaneous sounding bass fill that's unaccompanied in the middle of the song or towards the end of the song. It's really, really wonderful. But he's fascinating because you can watch him play a song that, like, it sounds, the intonation is really unusual. And but then you watch him play it again and again and again. He does it exactly the same way on fretless. He's playing fretless bass, and really, really, like, just fascinating. He's truly got his own sense of intonation, and it works. It's just highly idiosyncratic.
Hmm.
Um, and I love that. I love when people have any of the attributes of music, highly personalized or highly individualized. And then even better is when a group has a highly groupalized sound, where it just doesn't sound like anybody or anything. The Shags are a great example of that.
Hmm.
Um, they were making music, and they were sort of guided by their father, who thought they were going to become superstars, but they they had a very, very unusual understanding of what pop music was or could be. And it ended up being a favorite album of lots of people. Like, I think NRBQ actually ended up covering it, and Frank Zappa said it was in his top 10 albums. And
Okay.
do you know this one?
Mm-mm.
It's called Philosophy of the World by the Shags.
I'll have to
Yeah,
investigate. That sounds cool.
it's mind blowing. Yeah, there's nothing like it. It came out maybe, I think, in the late 60s or maybe 1970, thereabouts.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, and I think two of the three sisters are still alive, and they've done a reunion concert or set of shows, but they made it much more. The music fits much more neatly into conventional expectations of music. It's still got that weird flair around the edge, but um, it's much more wrote rhythmically and stuff like that, which to me loses a lot of the charm.
Hmm.
you know,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
um, yeah.
I'm curious if any of the sort of considerations that you have in terms of like intuitive intonation translate to rhythm. Like I'm somebody who like I feel like I can't get into just intonation because I don't want to buy a new instrument personally. So I try to apply the same ideas to like basically to rhythmic content which because it's all kind of the same, right? And so I'm
Yeah,
curious
yeah.
if it translates in your mind in any sort of particular way, just intuitive rhythm or anything like that.
Um, just to backtrack a little bit, one of the things I'm working on, or I worked on, I actually was really fortunate. I had my very first residency anywhere ever about 2 months ago
Awesome.
in the North Georgia mountains, the Hambidge Center. It was really, really, it was wonderful. I had 2 weeks, and we socialized for dinner, and but for the most part, I was by myself, for all of the daylight hours. And the thing I was working on was I don't think there's enough information to be a book, but I'll put out a leaflet or a pamphlet at some point. Different ways to be microtonal without the use of any implements on guitar.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
and I think I don't have a count, but maybe there's 15 or 17 or 18 techniques that anybody who has a guitar can try. Most of them some are really easy, some are really difficult, and but it's a fun way to expand the pitch possibilities. And I think I include even the basic ones like bend the string, that'll do it. That'll change the pitch.
Totally.
But I try to go beyond the basic ones as well. But as to rhythm, I kind of feel the same way. When I was younger, I had a hard time with metronomic precision, and I think what it was I didn't have an internalized sense of drive. My sense of rhythm, my natural sense of rhythm, I think was much more all over the place. I wasn't able to focus on just the heartbeat. I was drawn, like this way and that way. I like my attention wasn't really steady for the boom, 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 boom,
Right.
boom. It just wasn't there. Like that's not how I heard music. But then I realized that is how most people perceive and encounter music. It's with some sort of rhythmic drive, right? So I had to I don't know, learn or just soak in, trying to get that metronomic sense of time. Not to be like stiff or whatever, but to have feel, to have a little bit of groove, and be able to differentiate between playing behind the beat, playing on the beat, playing in front of the beat, that kind of stuff. But if I'm really being honest, my basic natural tendency is to be flexible, be flexible with tempo, and then even notions of time signature. I don't when I'm improvising, especially, I don't adhere to. I'm not counting. I'm not, and I'm not doing 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3. I'm not doing that kind of stuff. I'm just expressing, but I feel like there are certain hallmarks of a mistake, and I think a mistake is something that makes either the person doing it or the person listening uncomfortable.
Okay.
And ooh, like if they, if you go like that, if that's the reaction from yourself or the listener, then it's a mistake, basically. And anything else, I think, as long as you are intending something intentional and you have enough experience to sort of gracefully navigate a sticky spot, when you find yourself in, it's all about to fall apart or go off the rails, that you can kind of, whether it's through just winding down or or ramping up, or or there are ways to be smooth. You want to be cool,
Right.
and so I feel like that's my natural tendency, is to sort of like, I'm aware of listener expectations of time and pulse and stuff like that, but I like having the flexibility to deviate from those expectations, and that's something that I've cultivated. I've cultivated being familiar with it and comfortable with it, and I've played enough shows and had enough minor train wrecks anyway, that if a train wreck happens or a minor train wreck happens, I'm able to adapt. I'm able to roll it in and accept it and move on, not linger and not keep the energy stagnant, not
Mm-hmm.
keep the focus, like, oh man, that thing that happened 3 minutes ago. Oh, I can't let that go. Because when you think about it, in a concert, if somebody's counting the mistakes or observing the mistakes, right? For a professional musician, how many like awful mistakes does a professional musician in the course make in the course of an hour-long performance? Not very many awful mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they make any, then maybe they make one or something, and it's usually just momentarily, right? It's like they didn't hit a note right or missed the cymbal or or just got off track a little bit, but you quickly recover, and I think um and I don't want to see improvisation as just a set of traps to avoid,
Right.
but I think that just having awareness that those traps are there, and that goes a long way to kind of making it an enjoyable experience for myself and anybody who's listening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just don't linger on the problems. Just celebrate the minor accomplishments. And
Totally.
yeah, and I don't know. I mean, this sounds like the power of positive thinking or something like that. And I don't know if that's a factor, but with rhythm is probably at the foundation of all music, whether the music acknowledges it or not. Western classical music tried to deny the existence of rhythm, for a long time. Rhythm was this thing that, okay, if we have to have rhythm, it's just going to be 4/4 at you know at uh, a at a speed that won't inflame uh, the salacious,
Sure.
um yeah, so but most other music in the world, and I think increasingly even Western classical music or modern symphonic music from Western cultures is hyper aware of rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
and the emotional effects that it can have on people,
Totally.
um and I think there was a tendency, improvisation, free improvisation tends to go in waves in terms of trends, or like uh at times it got to that, um there was the movement of the like the reductionist movement, where it was primarily out of Germany, where this was like in the 90s. um People were doing as little as possible, and that was the art, so like there was a trombonist who was big into that, and the trombonist would stand on the stage. The show had started, I guess, but nobody was really sure if the show had started, and the trombonist was just standing there, and then maybe would disassemble the trombone or something, and occasionally make a sound like like that, and that little sound was the only audible sound from the performer until maybe 6 or 7 or 8 minutes later. There'd be a sound like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to think that at this point, free improvisation, no one needs to stick with some really small version of what's possible, and I'd like to think that people can go anywhere it needs to go. If the music wants to have um like beats, in the sense of like, countable danceable time, that's
Mm-hmm.
fine, that's great, why not? Because for a long time it's like, oh no, nothing you can count, nothing, nothing you can dance to, nothing you can hum, no resolutions, certainly no major chords, no triads, and
Mm-hmm.
nothing can be funny, nothing can be, on and on and on. And so I think freedom and rhythm has to include playing beats. If you're gonna play what you feel, and um, hopefully, um, other people will enjoy it the way you do.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I guess we're at like an hour 20 here, and I want to be
Okay.
respectful of your time, but I just have a few more questions. I guess like you're extremely prolific. You have like 300 plus albums out, right?
Mhm.
I'm curious, like you've been talking about sort of like what a mistake is, and having like that bare presentation of everything. Was that like something you consciously decided to do to just be kind of constantly putting stuff out? Or I mean, like there are other types of people who it's like they're super particular about what they release, and that's never been my approach, but like part of me wonders if I benefit from it, because I don't know how much I benefit from actually putting everything out there. Do you ever think about these types of things, or like what's the sort of story with that?
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit of both actually. I am super particular, believe it or not. What I've put out, I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but it's not comprehensive, and I'm not saying I've held back a bunch of subpar material. I don't mean that,
Hmm.
but um, I've done a lot that's not on the internet. I've done tons, and so the things that are on the internet, I stand behind, even with if any of them have flaws, or if I was uncomfortable with them. Um, but everything on my Bandcamp page, I I heartily endorse, um, with with the acknowledgement that this was what I did on a particular day, or it was the culmination of a few months of preparation and writing and organizing or whatever to get to that point. Um, so I am particular, but I'm also prolific, and I think the pandemic has changed a lot of things because I I think that there was a sort of immediacy to a lot of what I was doing before the pandemic, where I would create something and then as quickly as possible get it on the internet to share.
Hmm.
Uh, and then with the pandemic, yeah, it just felt like I'm sure I'm not alone in this. I was searching for meaning, and I wasn't finding the same fulfillment in cranking out music as I was. I just wanted a blanket and you
Yeah.
know and world denying goggles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I kind of shifted my energies, and thankfully I found a group of young improvisers from around the world. We ended up forming something called Habitable Records. Um, and so a lot of my projects started being remote, which was, I'd done it before at times, but that sort of in-person stuff had kind of ceased for a while,
Hmm.
and so these remote projects, I had to kind of reimagine what was possible, and there are challenges, to improvising with somebody, across the ocean or something.
Hmm.
It's very different because improvisation, group or duo improvisation, is typically about it's a dialogue, it's an exchange of information in real time. So
Hmm.
all of a sudden you have this sort of time displaced factor, that you have, um yeah, like okay, I'll make something, I'm going to send it to you, and then you send me something, and it's a completely different way of working for me, and so it there was a steep learning curve, quite frankly, and so that's part of why um my breakneck pace of releasing stuff really slowed down considerably. The other thing is I started taking on more ambitious projects, or what I mean by that is projects that like literally take more time to complete.
Hmm.
Whether that's because with one example of, I have an album coming out very soon with my Italian drummer composer friend Francesca Remigi. Um, that album we actually recorded in person in March. She was able to come down to Athens, and we went to a studio, and it was a really, really wonderful experience. But on the back end, I was tasked with doing the mixing and mastering, which I love doing, but the mixing was really complicated. There are up to 30 tracks on some of the songs, and these are kind of unusual sounds. There's a lot of electronic sounds, a lot of acoustic sounds. You've got drums with an extremely wide dynamic range. She's playing everything from like just running her hand on a piece of paper type sounds to full blast, drum stuff. And then same with the instruments, same with my stringed instruments, being loud, soft, everything in the middle. And it was really hard. It's like, how do you present? Because what's funny about that is it was actually real life, real time improvisation. But then I have to sculpt a story out of it on the back end, because the recording doesn't capture what we were feeling in the room. It was a very neutral observer. It didn't feel what we were feeling. And my recording engineer friend Jesse did an absolutely amazing job of capturing all the information. But then I had to sort of shape it and sculpt it into an enjoyable listening experience, and trying to remain true to the actual exchange of information in person. I didn't want it to be something it wasn't. So it's quite true to life, and and I feel it's kind of how it would have felt if you had been there in person. But that stuff takes a lot of time. I mean, that mix, I worked on that for probably 4 months or something. I mean, not full time. I worked on it whenever I could, but it took a long time. And then the mastering took a long time for similar reasons. It was quite honestly the most challenging project I've ever worked on on the engineering side. It was, and I was learning new speakers, and we actually moved my office to a different part of the house, and so there were a lot of factors, informing that. Yeah.
Do you feel like the same thing that you were saying about improvisation and sort of like the analytical brain, sort of like taking a break? Does that sort of ring true for that as well with the mixing and mastering, or are you in more analytical mode?
It's a little bit more of a hybrid. I would say the analytical brain remains on, I think, when I'm making decisions, and that's why it takes so long. I think because it's not just like, that feels good, that feels nice, good,
Right.
done. It doesn't happen that quickly, not for me anyway. When I have to engage my thinking brain, little gets accomplished. I'm much more productive when I'm just riding cosmic waves. But I do enjoy it very much. I love doing that, and I feel like through these, to me, difficult projects, I learn a ton that I wouldn't learn otherwise if I wasn't challenged, because that one I was really challenged, quite honestly. And I feel like the end result is really unusual, because it's unusual music, or at least the arc of all of it together as a unit of 11 songs. It's unusual, but the mixing and the mastering, not only from my memory and experience, but I think the end result is actually unusual. It's an unusual treatment of this source material, this raw material that my other engineer friend captured so well. It's fascinating to see these things, take on their own life, and only like a handful of people, if even, have heard this music yet. So I'm excited to get it out there. I feel like it's a real breakthrough project for my take. For my part, it's unusual, it's engaging, it's and I hope compelling, to somebody.
Awesome. Cool. Well, the last thing I'll ask you, I see that you have tattoos on your knuckles that say "read books," and you mentioned, or Oh,
Oh,
cookbook.
my camera seems to do an automatic zoom thing. So
Ah, I
cookbook,
thought I
yeah.
saw a read the other day. Did you also
Yeah,
have
that
read?
says am I doing it right? Readjust.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I thought I was saying read books, but so readjust and then cookbook.
Well, so
I've created my
I
own story here about
yeah,
your tattoos.
So it also says just read. So the readjust thing, actually my wife suggested I do that. And we realized that I could turn it around and say just read. So I used to work for the University of Georgia. I for 13 years and then a little bit um, here and there after that. I worked at the writing assessment lab. So we dealt with standardized English language proficiency tests for the state of Georgia.
Interesting, very cool.
And so anyway, the readjust thing and just read was kind of a like just a hilarious in joke, you know. And for a while at my office, they wanted to make a poster of me saying just read, you know, having my knuckles say that, you know, because we had these inspirational posters, you know, like Yoda would say, you know, read a book, and oh, I can't think who else, like I don't know, Tony Danza or somebody like that, you
Yoda and Tony Danza.
know.
Um, well, I guess I asked this because I'm just curious if you. This is a open-ended question, but are there any books or you also mentioned sci-fi movies. I'm just curious if you could curate anything for myself and the podcast listeners that
Oh
you would
wow.
suggest, either books or sci-fi or
Yeah. Oh
anything.
wow, books. Wow, there's an incredible book called The Perfect American.
Okay.
And I think Philip Glass ended up making a musical out of it, or an opera out of it that I have not seen. But the perfect the Perfect American, and it's a fictionalized account of Walt Disney's last days.
Okay.
And it's yeah, you know, just it's searing. It sticks with you. It really does. And there's
Awesome.
some scenes that you'll never ever forget in the book, you know. Um, and let's see. There was a book by a Nigerian American author named Nnedi Okorafor. It's
Okay.
called Lagoon, and it takes place in Lagos, Nigeria. And it's basically about, I guess, about space aliens, you know, coming, but they arrive in Lagos, you know, and all the confusion and revelations that happen, you know, during um, when space aliens invade your town, you know.
Hmm.
But it's really fascinating, and I've read other books about Nigeria, and it's sort of you know, it really deepened my understanding of a lot of the sort of cultural and even political aspects of modern life in Nigeria, in the city. Trying to think, I'm reading a really wonderful book um, by a new friend who I met at the residency at Hambridge. His name is Jeff Jackson from North Carolina, and the book is called Mira Corpora, and it's a sort of coming of age story, and it's harrowing. It's really uh, very very bleak at times, you know. But the writing and pacing and everything is extraordinary. But like I said, I'm a pretty slow reader. I As far as movies, we've been really loving the new Lord of the Rings series.
Okay.
Um, the Rings of Power, it's called, and honestly, it really stands up to the original trilogy in my estimation. Because the I was pretty disappointed in the Hobbit
Mm.
uh, movies. I only saw the first two, and I couldn't even bring myself to watch the third one. But this is really good, and it's like a prequel to the movies, to the uh, Two Towers and all that. Um, I don't
I'm
know.
somebody like I love the movie Primer in terms of like sci-fi, like weird time stuff, you know. I guess just
Oh, I don't
because
know that one.
it's like I feel like the most heavy duty time travel movie in terms of just like taking it seriously and how it would work out. But it's also the type of movie that because of the nature of time in it, you have to watch it like multiple times to appreciate the sort of new insight that you get.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but yeah, I mean,
Recent?
uh, I think it's from I want to say it's from like the early 90s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna write that down right now because
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
curious what you would think about it. Um, it's kind of funny that you mentioned the aliens landing in Legos type thing because I was thinking of asking you about sort of speculative exomusicology. I talked to this guy previously who wrote a book about this, and I think that's such a fascinating topic. Like, what would
Wow.
alien music be like?
I
But
immediately, you know, what's immediately in that folder is Spock, you know, and the Vulcan harp, you know.
mm,
I mean, I guess that's exo, you know,
totally.
exo
Um,
musical. I know. I mean, you know, honest, I've not really ever given that any thought. I've never really thought about what, you know, um, well, that's not true. My whole life has been devoted to making music that doesn't sound like what other people make. So maybe I have done it. I haven't put two and two
mm.
together.
Yeah, I mean it's a big topic to open up as I'm asking the supposedly last question, but
Last question.
sometimes
Wow,
it'd
no,
be cool to
that's
talk
really
about it a
big.
little bit deeper.
Well,
Yeah,
you know, next time we'll have to like I would love to interview you because now I'm curious about, you know, all kinds of things. So yeah, I'll have to start a series.
and I will say also that your mention of the third bridge is kind of interesting because this podcast was going to be called the Third Bridge briefly,
Really?
and then I just went with Bridge podcast because it's supposed to be
Oh,
interdisciplinary. But I feel like you're the only person that's ever mentioned the third bridge, so
oh, wow, neat,
very
neat.
cool.
Well, it's funny. I had so years ago, I had a record company called Sol Ponticello,
Mhm.
and the name I changed the spelling of an Italian term called Sol Ponticello, which means bowing over the bridge or across the bridge. And so I thought of Sol Ponticello, SOL, like sun over the
Mhm.
bridge. So I've always been fascinated with I like bridges. I like bridges. I like building bridges. I don't think I've ever actually built a bridge like physically, but you know, I like the notion of it.
Yeah, you and Rick Toon should collaborate on a bridge sometime.
The bridge. Definitely. Yeah, no, he and Rick's work has been, you know, central, you know, for my electric playing for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, I'm very jealous of your Walrus guitar. It's super cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful. You know, it's got so it has two necks. It has the fretted neck and the fretless neck. And
Interesting.
I've had the I for the first, you know, 6 years or so that I had it, I just always played fretless, but I've just kept the fretted on for quite a while and yeah, it's been really great. You know, I usually put a contact mic on it so I can get the bitonal activity, you know, between my fretting hand and the nut.
Nice.
Um, so
Interesting.
that's my secret with that guitar. It's
Does the whole neck
acoustic quality.
come in and out, or is it like a magnetized fretboard, or
No, the whole neck.
interesting?
It's
Okay.
got three bolt screws, screw bolts. And they yeah, just you just loosen all the strings and then yeah, just loosen and then take out the bolts. The ball end of the string is actually at the headstock end, and you just pull each ball out of the channel, and then you're left with the strings are still attached at the tuner end, which is, you know, by your leg. So it's real easy. That's the guitar I usually travel with, you know. And the same with the other Rick tune. Those both of them have the necks come off.
Very cool. Interesting. Um, Rad. Well, Killick, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we talk again in the future.
Hey, John.
I'll
Yeah,
put a bunch of links to all your music and all the stuff that we talked about and
thank you,
various recommendations.
thank you.
Yeah, anything you want to point people towards, or any links or anything I should include beyond that?
Um, yeah, I wish I had sort of like an easy primer, but something that was just amazing that I just participated in was playing with Paolo Angeli from Sardinia. Paolo plays a prepared Sardinian guitar, so he's got motors and foot pedals and all kinds of things attached to his guitar. But he's a really, really deep and wonderful musician. And we recorded a studio album, which I'll be mixing and mastering slowly. But there is a live video of our duo live performance on YouTube on my my YouTube thing. It's the first thing that comes up. And we were joking because I'm gonna be turning 50 soon. I guess so. Today's the 11th, so 3 weeks, I think. And Paolo is, I think, 52 maybe. And but he was saying that we both seem like we're 38, you know. So so we called the live performance "We Feel 38."
Cool. Yeah, I think I saw that pop up. Cool, interesting. Rad. Well, I'll point everybody towards that, and yeah, thanks so
Well,
much
I
for
really
talking to me.
appreciate this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Well, Killick Hinds, it's been a pleasure. I will talk to you in the future.
Okay, take care, John.
You too.